appalling scenes with people clambering onto crowded boats in shallow waters, disgraceful violence from gang members towards the French police and towards migrants, and people crushed to death in the middle of these overcrowded boats. We cannot stand for this. And that is why the new action agreed with France includes establishing a new French compagnie de marche of specialist enforcement officers with stronger public order powers to address increases in violence on French beaches and prevent boat launches before they reach the water, providing training for additional drone pilots to intercept boat launches, and crucially, supporting the Maritime Review, the new review instigated by the French Interior Minister, so that they can intervene more effectively, pursuing what last week's declaration describes as a novel and innovative approaches to intercept boats and enhanced maritime cooperation to ensure we adapt as the criminal gangs change their approach. Meanwhile, we're changing our domestic law in the Border Security Bill to criminalise those who endanger people's lives at sea, so we can more easily prosecute those who crowd onto overcrowded boats and put other people's lives at risk. Action in both French and UK waters. Fourth, new innovative approaches to returns. Already since the election, we have increased international returns for those with no right to be in the UK. But until now, we have not been able to return people who have travelled by these dangerous and illegal boat crossings to other safe countries that they have travelled through. Previous governments tried to achieve this, indeed even promised it, but never secured an agreement to do so. Under the groundbreaking agreement announced by the Prime Minister and President Macron last week, individuals who arrive in the UK by small boat can for the first time be readmitted to France. This is the right thing to do and is also an important step towards undermining the business model of the organised crime groups behind these crossings. So we've agreed to establish a safe reciprocal exchange mechanism for individuals in France who apply with appropriate documentation to be transferred to the UK subject to clear eligibility criteria and stringent security checks. Transfers to the UK under the new route will match the number readmitted to France on a one-for-one basis. Further details of this scheme will be set out in the immigration rules once final arrangements are in place. And this innovative agreement means people who undertake illegal, dangerous journeys to the UK, putting their own and other people's lives at risk and paying money to fuel an entire criminal industry, being returned to France, where the boats set off from. And in return, we will take people who apply lawfully, who pass security checks, with priority given to those who have a connection with the UK, those who are most likely to be refugees or are most vulnerable to smuggler gangs. So yes, this is the right thing to do, establishing a principle that whilst the UK will always be ready to play its part alongside other countries in helping those fleeing persecution and conflict, we believe this should be done through a controlled and managed legal way, not through dangerous, illegal, uncontrolled or criminal routes. And it's also the first step to undermining the promises made by criminal gangs when they tell people that if they travel to the UK, they cannot be returned to the continent. Now they can be. And we will develop the pilot step by step and trial different approaches as part of it, varying the numbers and seeking the most effective ways to undermine the gangs, to reduce boat crossings, and also to help France deal with the problems that they face in the Calais region. The Prime Minister and French President set out their expectation that this will be operationalised in the coming weeks. Fifth, we will take stronger action on illegal working and asylum failures here in the UK, because for far too long it has been too easy for people to work illegally in the UK and for employers to exploit them, undercutting responsible businesses. Already, we have increased illegal working raids and arrests by 50% since the election. Already, we have more than tripled the value of employer penalties issued to over £89 million. And we've launched a new surge in enforcement linked to the gig economy, with changes to the law in the Borders Bill to compel companies to conduct proper checks on the right to work. And we will also bring forward further reforms to the asylum system to prevent its operation being exploited either by gangs to encourage travel to the UK or for people here illegally to find unfair ways to stay. So we need to be part of the global response to irregular and illegal migration, not separate from it. working in partnership, not just shouting and pointing at the sea. Everyone knows that there is no single silver bullet to tackle illegal migration and dangerous boat crossings, and it takes time to unpick the deep roots that gangs have put down and to build the foundations of a new cross-border approach. But that is what we're determined to do. Stronger borders, stronger law enforcement in France and in the UK, increasing returns, and building the foundations of a new long-term approach where countries cooperate to prevent illegal migration and to ensure that there is sanctuary for genuine refugees. No one should be making these dangerous boat journeys which undermine our border security and put lives at risk. That is why this cooperation between the UK and France is so important, and I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Home Secretary Chris Philp.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Home Secretary for advance sight of her statement. The Home Secretary comes here today sounding rather pleased with herself. I'm afraid she has no reason to. A year ago, she promised to smash the gangs. She said again and again that was her plan. Indeed, it was her only plan. Yet today, there is no mention of what was once her favourite catchphrase. That is because her claim to smash the gangs has become a joke, an embarrassment to her and to the government. Now, we warned that law enforcement alone would not be enough. So did the National Crime Agency. But she didn't listen. And what then happened? The 12 months following July the 5th last year have been the worst such period in history for small boat crossings. 44,359, up 40% year on year. The first 13 days of July this month have also been the worst in history. 2,510 in less than 2 weeks, up 213% year on year. And this calendar year so far has been the worst in history as well, up 57% on last year. Madam Deputy Speaker, she is setting records, just all the wrong ones. These boat crossings are now the worst ever. Does she accept that she has lost control of our borders and she is failing in her most basic duty to protect the United Kingdom? Now, she says she has a new deal with France. Yet President Macron says this needs EU agreement. Is this true? Does it need EU agreement? And if so, have they provided it? And a deal must of course involve an agreed number. Yet when the Home Secretary is asked, she is unable to say what numbers are involved. Will she now come clean and tell Parliament what number, if any, has been agreed? And if there is no agreement with the EU and no agreed number as part of this deal, then there is no deal at all, just vacuous spin. Now, the only number we have seen reported is just 50 illegal immigrants a week. This was put to the Prime Minister last Thursday, and he did not deny it. Now, 50 a week represents only 6% of illegal arrivals, meaning 94% could stay. Does she seriously think that allowing 94% of illegal immigrants to stay will be any kind of deterrent? Her claim to smash the gangs was a gimmick, and so is her 6% returns deal. The truth is this: the only way to fix this is to remove every single illegal arrival as soon as they get here, without judicial process, either to their country of origin or to a third country. That would be a real deterrent. We saw this approach work in Australia about 10 years ago. And such a scheme, I'm glad the Honourable Member mentions that, such a scheme for the UK was ready to start in July of last year. The previous government had done all of the legal and logistical work needed. All she had to do was press go. But she and the Prime Minister cancelled it just days before it was due to start, and as a result, we now see record numbers crossing. Will she now admit she made a terrible mistake, and will she now start a proper 100% removals deterrent? Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, the damage done by illegal immigration at this scale is immense. Far from closing asylum hotels as they promised, there are now nearly 3,000 more people in asylum hotels than at the time of the last election. And I have personally witnessed rampant illegal working from the very hotels that she runs. I saw Deliveroo, Uber Eats and Just Eat bikes in the compound of an asylum hotel whose residents have no right to work. Will she at least commit today to ending illegal working from the very hotels that she runs? And we see reports of migrants based in hotels being charged with serious crimes, including rape and sexual assaults on women and children. Louise Casey has warned that a significant proportion of sexual offences are committed by those seeking asylum. Cases like 29-year-old Afghan Sadiq Nikzad, convicted of raping a 15-year-old girl. His defence counsel claimed he did not understand this was wrong due to cultural differences. This madness has to stop. The Home Secretary cancelled a proper deterrent plan just days before it was due to start. Her claim to smash the gangs lies in tatters. She has presided over the highest number of illegal small boat crossings in history. Will she now apologise to the House and to the country for her appalling failure?
Home Secretary.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Shadow Home Secretary just wants to pretend that the last 8 years never happened.
It's the worst ever now.
He knows that this crisis, this small boats chaos, went on for 340 weeks under the Tories. A period in which, when he was Immigration Minister, overall migration near trebled and small boat crossings increased tenfold when he was the Immigration Minister in charge. And during the 340 weeks that the Tories were in charge when this happened, 128,000 people crossed the Channel. How many were returned to France? 0. How many were sent to Rwanda? Well, he said himself it was 0 because he didn't even want to count the 4 volunteers. And, he keeps saying, that somehow it was ready to start. If it had been ready to start, they wouldn't have called the election. They would have actually introduced the scheme that in fact had been running for more than 2 years at the cost of £700 million with just 4 volunteers sent. I can also tell him that since the election, this government has returned over 35,000 people who have no right to be here, and that is a 24% increase in enforced returns compared to the last year that his party was in charge. It is a 28% increase in failed asylum returns compared to the last year that his party was in charge. And as for agreement with France, that he doesn't seem to want to talk about very much, I actually asked him about exactly this when I was Home Affairs Select Committee Chair and he was the Immigration Minister back in 2020. And I specifically asked him, what chance do you put on being able to get a bilateral agreement, say with France, for them to take back people who have arrived here from France? And he said, 5 years ago, that's what he was working on. Indeed, he told the committee, one of our priorities will be to reach those agreements, and it is, I think, strongly in the French national interest to agree such a returns agreement. That gives me significant cause for optimism. Well, turns out he should have been optimistic about the return of a Labour government reaching an agreement where he failed. Here's what he also said. He said, we intend to return as many illegal immigrants who have arrived by small boats as possible. We have flights planned in the coming days to return these individuals back to France, and we will be looking to ramp up this activity. Well, that was 5 years ago. Flights never went. The activity was never ramped up. The Shadow Foreign Secretary tried to return people to France. The Shadow Justice Secretary tried to return people to France. The Shadow Justice Secretary even called for the UK to, quote, take 1 asylum seeker from France in return for every 1 illegal migrant that we return to them. Or indeed, more than 1. He said more than 1. And as for interception in shallow waters, he said when he was Immigration Minister, some boats that are just 250 yards away from the French coast have just not been stopped by the authorities. This must change. I agree. But that was 5 years ago, and he didn't change a thing. Because they never understood that you don't change things just by jumping up and down and shouting about them. It needs partnership working and hard graft. That's what this government has done.
Bedford.
Deputy Speaker, can I congratulate the Prime Minister and my right honourable friend on succeeding in agreeing a deal with France. It just shows that treating people with respect can actually result in positive action, and treating them with contempt in the way that the Conservatives did throughout this issue was never going to provide a solution. But can she confirm that those 4 volunteers that the government paid to send to Rwanda, that each of them was paid by the British taxpayer £150,000 to provide free housing, free university education and free private healthcare? Who approved that funding within the department?
Was it the Secretary?
Well, I can confirm that the deal that the previous government did with Rwanda involved paying £150,000 for every single individual to cover food and accommodation and healthcare, as he said, for 5 years. So those bills do continue. There was a concern raised by the accounting officer, so a direction had to be given on the basis that the ministers were advised it was not value for money, but they continued regardless.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Lisa Smart.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm grateful to the Home Secretary for advance sight of her statement. We all want to stop these dangerous channel crossings that first ballooned under the former Conservative government. Cross-border cooperation will be key to achieving this, and there's clearly a lot of work needed after the Conservatives ripped up the returns agreement that allowed us to send irregular migrants back to Europe. I was very interested to hear the Shadow Home Secretary quote President Macron, and he was a little bit selective in his quote, though. He didn't quite mention the section of President Macron's remarks that attributed this problem to the Brexit deal the last Conservative government cooked up. This deal is a step in the right direction, and I sincerely hope it works. But people will be understandably sceptical that such a small scheme will act at this stage as an effective deterrent. Questions still need to be answered around how and when the UK and French governments will decide to scale up the pilot, so I'd welcome some more details from the Home Secretary on this. Of course, deals like this are only part of the solution. The Home Secretary mentioned, among other things, placing officers within Europol. But will she commit to negotiating a stronger leadership role for the UK in Europol to make it easier to crack down on the trafficking gangs behind these crossings? And does the Home Secretary acknowledge that we won't be able to fully take the power out of the hands of these gangs until we provide regulated entry for genuine refugees to the UK? One of the best deterrents to put people off the idea of coming here in the first place is for all asylum applications to be processed quickly, so that those who are granted refugee status can integrate and contribute to our community, and for those with no right to be here to be sent back swiftly. Could the Home Secretary update the House on the average time it takes to process an asylum application after arrival on British shores, and how has that changed over the past year? Until the government acts on these points, I hope it doesn't, but I fear it risks repeating the Conservatives' mistakes and failing to get to grips with this problem, something we all want them to do.
Home Secretary.
Well, I thank the honourable member for her questions. The Prime Minister and French President set out their expectation that we will be able to operationalise this and to begin the pilot in the coming weeks. The numbers will vary, and it is a pilot that will need to be developed, and we will need to trial different approaches as part of it, and I think that is the right and sensible approach. But the principle underpinning this is the right one, which is that we should be returning people who have paid money to criminal gangs to come on this dangerous journey that puts other people's lives as well as their own at risk on small boats and undermines our border security as well, in exchange for taking people who apply legally, who are more likely to be genuine refugees, who have been through security checks, or who are prioritising people who have a connection with with the UK. It also is a way to help undermine the business model of criminal gangs who tell people that there is no way to be returned to France or to any other country if they get on one of these dangerous small boats, and they use that as part of their advertising, and that is something we should be seeking to undermine. She's right, of course, it has to be alongside stronger law enforcement, and that is the stronger cooperation that we have already been building, including the new prosecution and investigation unit in Dunkirk to work with our National Crime Agency and also our Border Security Command as well. And we are also significantly speeding up asylum decision-making, bringing the backlog down. We also need action to speed up the appeals system, because the appeals area is the area that is causing delays as a result of the broken system that we inherited.
Chris Murray.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We didn't have small boat crossings 10 years ago, as the Home Secretary points out, and a large part of the reason is because we left the EU without any returns agreement or asylum organisation incorporated in the withdrawal agreement. Right, yeah. So can the Home Secretary, on a point of clarification, confirm that this is actually a completely unprecedented step that an EU country has allowed returns from out with the EU's external borders? And can I also note that this comes on the back of a very highly successful state visit from President Macron. We've come a long way from thinking a Prime Minister questioning whether it's friend or foe. Oh, Macron is our friend and our foe is the people smugglers. But can I ask the Home Secretary about the pilot? What are her parameters for success? How does she envisage it scaling up? And how does she envisage the UK-EU relation will have to adapt in the future to accommodate it if successful?
Secretary.
Well, I can tell my honourable friend that we will want to develop this over time. We will do so in partnership with France, because he is right that we will secure this cooperation together and have an impact together, just as successive governments, in fact, through the years, strengthened security cooperation with France through juxtaposed controls, through different border security arrangements and checks around lorries, around clandestine journeys, and that cooperation strengthened our border security. It's just not been done on small boats, and that's what this agreement was all about. It was about building that security cooperation that we've done in the past but haven't been done on small boats. That is what is so important now, and we will build that cooperation, because we will best strengthen our border security by working with countries on the other side of those borders who face exactly the same challenges, as far better than just standing on the shoreline shouting at the sea.
John Glenn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I always try and avoid rhetoric in this matter, and I can fully concede that my party lost significant numbers of MPs because of our failure to deliver on a number of issues prior to the election. That bit is agreed. But I've listened very carefully to the Right Honourable Lady. I've listened to what she said about stronger partnerships, stronger law enforcement action, and groundbreaking returns agreements. But does she not recognise that the scale of the problem, as evidenced by the numbers since the general election, and the scale of public concern, requires a much bigger solution than what is proposed? And without a significant deterrent of a much bigger scale, much sooner, she is not going to fix this problem to public satisfaction.
Home Secretary.
Well, no one should be making these dangerous boat crossings. They undermine border security and they put lives at risk. What we've seen is the change in the way that the criminal gangs have been operating over the last 6 months. Firstly, to increase the overcrowding, substantially increase the number of people on boats. That is putting more lives at risk. And secondly, to ensure they exploit the French rules about not intervening in French waters by loading the boats in French waters. That's why we've seen some of those disgraceful scenes, people crowding onto those boats from the water. That's why we have to tackle those issues. That's why the UK is changing our law so that we can prosecute people who are endangering other people's lives by climbing onto these overcrowded boats, and why France has instigated this French maritime review so that they can intervene in French waters. The The French Interior Minister and I have been working on these developments over several months, and I think it's right that we build that cooperation. It's also right that there's no single silver bullet. What we need is that comprehensive action on every single aspect of this in order to make a difference, to strengthen our border security and save lives.
Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm sure the Home Secretary shares my frustration that actually we could have been much further along with the returns agreement, because apparently the Shadow Immigration Minister admitted to a Conservative Party members' meeting in May that before we left the European Union, his government had worked out that we wouldn't be able to return people under the hard Brexit deal that they were providing. Given the progress that we've made in now getting a returns agreement, could she just outline for us what this will mean for somebody applying from France? Because this is going to be a safe route. And therefore, it's a very welcome movement for those of us who recognise the horrors in Calais and the limbo that we leave people in, and the importance of using this to dissuade people from getting onto a dangerous boat, because there is a legal mechanism that they could be used to reuniting with their families.
Home Secretary.
Well, my honourable friend's question is an important one, and we will set out the precise detail in the immigration rules once the final arrangements are ready to operationalise, that will set out the way in which people will be able to apply from France. They will need to have proper identification and also to go through security checks. Once people have applied, we will then set prioritisation decisions, including around whether people have connections to the UK, also whether people have are most likely to be from those countries which are most likely to be refugees, and also most likely to be targeted by the smuggler and trafficking gangs, and we will set out that detail in due course. But part of the reason for this being the one-for-one is because it has to also go alongside the returns to France for people who get onto these illegal boat crossings and end up paying huge amounts of money to fuel the criminal smuggler industry, and also to make sure that we simultaneously strengthen our border security as well as saving lives.
Pete Wishart.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is a grubby, grotesque little deal which in itself trades in lives on a selection of who qualifies for this one-in, one-out basis. This gimmick means we will now have different classes of the wretched, and it does nothing to address the crises that compel so many people to make these dangerous journeys in the first place. It is a gimmick doomed to fail, and it simply will not work. But there's one thing that could smash the gangs in one simple blow, and that is to establish safe and legal routes that have worked so perfectly in the past for people to come to this country.
Secretary.
Well, I just want to say to him, the small boat crossings are dangerous. They put lives at risk. We have seen people drowning and also being crushed to death on these overcrowded boats. And that's being driven and organised by criminal gangs who will do anything they can to profit from these dangerous journeys. And I just say to him, the whole point about having the one-to-one approach with France is that we have an agreement. That means that we will return people who come on those dangerous boat crossings, who pay money to the criminal gangs and frankly should be returned or should be part of the returns arrangements. And in return, we will take those who apply lawfully, who go through the application process, who go through security checks. I think that principle is the right one. The UK, as we've shown through Ukraine and through Hong Kong, will always do its bit to help those fleeing persecution and conflict. However, we also think there should be much stronger enforcement, and we should not have this illegal migration that undermines border security and puts lives at risk in the Channel.
Jacob Collier.
Madam Deputy Speaker, under the Tories we had Liz Truss question whether France was actually an ally. So to hear last week President Macron's words, it's nice that Britain has friends once again. In the 340 weeks that the party opposite were in charge of this small boats crisis, they sent no one back to France and just 4 people back to Rwanda, stuffed with cash in their pockets. Does the Home Secretary agree with me that the way that we get results is working with international partners and not berating them?
Yeah.
Well, I do think we should be working with international partners. That is how we will get the cooperation, because if criminal gangs operate across borders, then of course we need governments and law enforcement to cooperate across borders to take those gangs down, and also to get returns in place as well. The Conservatives did claim that they were going to get those bilateral returns agreements in place. That's what they claimed in 2020, that's what they claimed in 2021, that's what they claimed for years. That's what they claimed again in 2023, that was what they would seek to do. But they failed year after year to do it, because all they did was shout at France and at other countries instead of actually doing the hard graft to get agreements in place.
Sir John Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is about principle and practice. The principle is that every country has both the right, indeed the duty, to secure its borders, and in practice ours have become porous. Now, I agree with the Home Secretary that global instability continues to drive illegal migration. I agree with her that we need cooperation upstream, and I agree with her that previous governments have done far too little. But the scale of this problem requires more than she's offering today. The trend is up. If it continues, 85,000 people will cross illegally, each one knowing that they're coming here illegally. This requires much more emphatic action. Everyone who comes should be incarcerated. All those that can be returned should be. And we must recognise that the asylum system is being gamed on an industrial scale. So will she answer this very straightforward question? What evidence does she have that hostile states and organised criminals are using this as a route to get people in this country to do still more harm?
Home Secretary.
Well, let's be clear, we need action right across the board, from the prevention, working in partnership with countries like Iraq, for example, that we are strengthening, right through to the law enforcement and increased action on the criminal gangs, and also the border security itself, action along the French coast and in the Channel, in French waters, and also the returns arrangements and strengthening returns arrangements and action here in the UK, whether that be on illegal working or whether that be on reforms to the asylum system. And I do think that we also need to be clear that there have to be strong standards around issues around criminality. Anybody who comes to the UK through whatever route needs to abide by our laws, and that needs to be enforced. But he will be aware we have put in place new measures to strengthen the criminality checks in the asylum system, to have much stronger action as part of the Borders Bill. I hope he would support it rather than voting against it.
Joe White.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Could I welcome that we have a Home Secretary who's willing to do what it takes to stop those small boats? Now, the French are claiming that the ability to work illegally in the UK is what motivates those people who are willing to take that dangerous journey across the Channel. Would the Home Secretary agree, and can she outline the action she is taking to crack down on illegal working and destroying those incentives?
My honourable friend is right, because it has been way too easy to work illegally in this country for far too long. And that is why, since the election already, we've increased the illegal working raids by 50%, we've increased the arrests for illegal working by 50%, and we've increased the penalties for employers who are exploiting illegal migration, undercutting responsible and respectable businesses. We've increased those penalties by a third since the election as well. But we have to go further. And in particular, we know that this is being exploited in the gig economy, where there aren't proper checks in place. So we will change the law, and we're bringing in a new law to involve crackdown in the gig economy alongside the surge of immigration enforcement activity and biometric checks to be able to check people's fingerprints and check who they are on the spot. We have to have that stronger enforcement and also the stronger rules in place. It's a real shame that the opposition parties, Conservatives and Reform, voted against those illegal working rules.
Dr. Andrew Murison.
Madam Deputy Speaker, does the Home Secretary agree with President Macron's analysis last week that the reason people want to come here is because the UK is perceived as being attractive to illegal migrants, what he referred to as the pull factors, and what one of his MPs referred to as Britain being El Dorado. If she does agree with the French president, what is she doing to reduce those pull factors?
Secretary.
Well, as I just set out in the previous answer, I do think, frankly, it has been too easy to work illegally in this country for too long. And we know that one of the things that the criminal gangs say to people is it will be easy to get a job. They even will give people discounts if they can come and work for those same criminal gangs operating in the UK. So we know that that is part of the way that the criminal gangs advertise and try and promote their dangerous and illegal business. That's why we cannot stand for this kind of illegal working. It's why not only are we increasing the raids, not only are we increasing arrests up by 50% just in the space of this year compared to the previous year when his party was in power, and we are strengthening the law. I really hope he will urge his party to support this law rather than continually voting against it.
Sally Jameson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the work the Government and Home Secretary has done to get this arrangement with France and for the Border Security Bill, which has those anti-terror style powers to help tackle the crossings. And as she's sort of already outlined, dealing with some of these delivery companies who are continuing to hire people who arrive on these boats is absolutely critical. Now, I know she said she's been in legislation to do this and make it illegal. Can she confirm that this will be robustly implemented? Because it's these delivery companies, and we all know who they are, who are frankly incentivising the boat crossings and ultimately threatening our national security.
Home Secretary.
Well, my honourable friend is right, because we know that although some of the delivery companies have said that they will do stronger checks, in practice it's just not happening, and our immigration enforcement teams are finding too many cases when they go and do the raids where those rules are being broken and people are working who have no right to do so and who are here illegally as well. That's why we're increasing the raids, that's why we're increasing the arrests, but why we also have to change the law so that those, whether it be delivery companies or other organisations in the gig economy, have to take some responsibility and not just find that they are making profit from exploiting illegal migration, which in the end fuels the work of criminal gangs.
Liz Saville-Roberts.
War, persecution and climate change means that more and more people are fleeing their homes for their own safety. The Home Secretary talks of the need for comprehensive action on every single aspect of this, yet her government has cut international aid by £6 billion, while the US government has cut its own so drastically that it could result in 14 million preventable deaths by 2030. Does she not agree that without adequate international aid and cooperation to tackle such factors at their source, we are simply setting ourselves up for more humanitarian crises and more migration pressures?
Well, the honourable member will know the difficult decision we have had to take around overseas aid in order to ensure that we can increase the defence investment that we need to keep our country safe. But she's also right that we need to work internationally in order to prevent dangerous journeys, but in order to make sure that people can get sanctuary and support without having to make dangerous journeys in the first place. And that kind of international cooperation to do so, whether it be through the kinds of resettlement schemes that we have run through Ukraine, for example, or through much more targeted work closer to home, it's that international cooperation that matters.
Oliver Ryan.
Deputy Speaker, can I welcome the Home Secretary's action today? She's taking this problem seriously, producing serious solutions and a serious strategy. Madam Deputy Speaker, it's now 80 days since the member for Clacton told the world on social media, and I quote, "Reform UK's policy team has drafted comprehensive strategy for the deportation of illegal migrants." Can I ask the Home Secretary if she's seen that strategy yet, or indeed any detail on their plans? The Frenchman Jules Verne wrote that Phileas Fogg travelled the world in 80 days, and does she think the Leader of Reform has been too busy, perhaps, travelling the world, flogging gold, selling cameos, to produce any such strategy at all?
Well, you're right, certainly. He has been travelling around the world, sadly not here today once more when we are discussing these issues in Parliament. Look, if Reform was serious about being able to take action against the criminal gangs, then why on earth do they vote against the counter-terrorism powers to go after them in the first place? And sadly, their approach to one in, one out seems to simply be about their parliamentary party.
Malthouse.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I have to say I've been a bit taken aback by the lack of humility shown by the Home Secretary in the face of what has been a catastrophic first 12 months in terms of crossing numbers. It might have been better for her to acknowledge that Smash the Gangs, which she was always told was going to be a complete failure, has indeed been so. But I suppose we should be grateful that she's finally reached for the briefing notes left in the Home Office and in number 10, not about a returns agreement, but about a SWATs agreement. And I do, I suppose, offer her congratulations on getting that deal over the line with the French. However, she will know that it's only going to be effective, and I disagree with her about it being a silver bullet. I do think this has always been the only solution. She will know it will only be effective if we can get to a very high percentage of returns to France. So 2 questions. First of all, what further incentive could she offer to the French to go beyond this relatively small pilot? And given that if we're offering swaps and the theory is no one will then cross, would she be willing to go to, say, a 2-for-1 swap? And secondly, as she pointed out, the gangs will react. So does she plan to cut a similar deal with the Belgians?
Home Secretary.
So, first of all, I think I disagree with him on the issue around the criminal gangs, because I think whatever you do, you have to have much stronger enforcement on the criminal gangs. Otherwise, whatever arrangements are put in place, if the criminal gangs are just given free rein to be able to do whatever they want, they will find other ways around any arrangement, and they will find other ways to make money. So it's crucial that as part of any action that we take, we need a stronger enforcement against criminal gangs. And the National Crime Agency has delivered a 36% increase in high-impact disruptions in the last 12 months compared to the year before, and building that partnership with other European countries in order to be able to go further. But I do recognise the Honourable Member has argued for one-for-one returns before, and he has done so when other people were not doing so, and so I recognise the way he has argued for this and also argued for innovative approaches. And I agree with him. We, of course, want to develop this, but we need to start with a pilot arrangement that allows both the UK and France to trial things in a way that we have never done before. The previous government always made grand claims that somehow everything was going to be solved in the next 3 days, and then failed, repeatedly failed, because they didn't build up the credibility and the plans and build up a systematic approach working in partnership. That's what I think we need to do.
Olivia Bailey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I applaud the Shadow Home Secretary for his valiant attempt to sound outraged this afternoon. But isn't the truth that while they picked fights on the world stage, this government has rebuilt relationships and delivered a groundbreaking returns agreement that they would have given their eye teeth for? Does the Secretary of State agree with me that while sound and fury may make the members opposite feel better, it is this government that is systematically getting on with the job of stopping the boats?
Home Secretary.
Well, my honourable friend is right that it is clear that the previous government did try at different stages to do the kinds of things that we are setting out. But the trouble is they allowed the relationship with France to deteriorate to such a point that at different points they were doing diplomacy by social media, by different tweets at each other. That did not get practical agreements in place. The work we have done does provide practical arrangements that we can build on, and we can trial different approaches. It's important that we do. That is the best way to strengthen our border security, and it is what successive governments previously had done until recent years.
Lee Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I've never heard such pathetic drivel in all my life from the Home Secretary and backbenchers. Of course, it's not the people smugglers bringing the illegal migrants over the Channel, it's the French warships who transport them halfway, give them to British border security. They then bring them to our shores, put them in buses and take them to hotels. The real people smugglers are the French authorities and the British authorities. So does she agree with me that the British Border Force should take these illegal migrants straight back to France?
Home Secretary.
Well, no one should be making these dangerous boat crossings. It undermines border security and puts lives at risk. But I would just say to him, if he really cares about stopping boats and stopping the criminals that organise them, why has he and his party repeatedly voted against bringing in counter-terrorism powers to go after the gangs? Why have they repeatedly voted against the new laws around illegal working to clamp down on people in the gig economy? Why has he repeatedly voted against stronger laws to have stronger and higher standards, against criminality in our asylum system? Time and again, they just vote against because they don't actually want to solve the problem. They just want to moan about it. They don't actually want to change anything with France, to get France to intervene in French waters, as this government has been working to get France to do. Instead, all they want to do is shout at the sea.
Yeah. Paul Wall.
An Egyptian economic migrant named Obaida was interviewed by the BBC in Calais. He said he tried and failed 4 times to cross the Channel, but he said that since the Prime Minister's agreement with President Macron, he was now giving up. And I quote, "I don't want to go to Britain anymore because they're making it much harder for us. Every time we try, they deflate our boats and remove the engine. If they make it even harder, I'll stop trying." Doesn't that prove that this new deal to send migrants back to France can be a genuine deterrent, unlike the last government's pathetic attempt to claim credit for it?
Home Secretary.
Well, my honourable friend is right. What we need to do is the action on the boats in shallow waters, the action on the criminal gangs and on preventing people before they reach the French coast in the first place. And we also need the ability to return people to France as part of this new agreement, and the stronger action to stop people working illegally here in the UK as well. At every stage, we need action in each of these different areas. That is hard graft. It's not about gimmicks, it's about the hard graft, but that is the way we'll strengthen our border security and save lives.
Dame Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And the Home Secretary is an intelligent woman, and she must realise that this UK-France migration cooperation is a drop in the ocean when, since it was announced, another 1,375 people have made that dangerous and illegal crossing. So can she confirm to the House that one of the other things that she is working on, she may not like Rwanda, but is she working on finding another safe third country where 100% of people who cross the Channel illegally can be processed?
Home Secretary.
Well, I would say to her that I think the agreement that we have reached is a fundamentally different approach and is groundbreaking, and it's something that I have discussed with the Interior Minister in France for many months, but it's something that UK governments have been working to try and do for around 5 years and not achieved it. So this is a first step. It is an important one. It's a very important one in terms of establishing the principles, both around returns and around the stronger law enforcement cooperation as well. We have also said we will work with other European countries on looking at different approaches, including returns hubs, including different innovative and novel approaches. There are other European countries who are interested in working with us on similar and different kinds of approaches, and we will continue to do so.
Colin Naismith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In her earlier remarks, the Home Secretary referenced the memo that the Shadow Justice Secretary wrote in March 2023, proposing exactly the kind of one-in, one-out deal that this government has now secured. And I was struck in that memo by the assertion that that kind of scheme would, I quote, quickly break the business model of the smugglers. So does the Home Secretary agree with me that the party opposite looks utterly partisan, petty and two-faced, as they now decide to oppose in public exactly the kind of deal that they were arguing for in private when in government?
Yeah, I think my honourable friend is exactly right. things that the Conservative Party tried and failed to deliver when they were in government. Suddenly they want to just oppose now, because in the end that's the situation, that's the hole they've got themselves into. That instead of wanting to be practical and serious about different measures step by step that can make a difference, instead they just want to oppose everything and just actually fail to solve the problem but just moan about it instead.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome these important first steps announced today by the Home Secretary, and also her commitment to working with wider European partners. But I wonder if she could assure us about what safeguards have been put in place to ensure that international law is respected and the rights of genuine asylum seekers have been protected.
Secretary.
Well, as the honourable member will be aware, by doing this work with France, France is a country that abides by international law, where we have a long history of cooperation in a whole series of different areas around security, around different policy issues over very many years. All of them are compliant with international law, and we will continue to ensure that that is the case.
Chris Webb.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I want to applaud the Home Secretary on the months of hard work, serious negotiation that resulted in this deal. We now have a real deterrent that the party opposite failed for many years to secure for my constituents and across the country. But these deals make it more important that we keep pushing the strength of our domestic response to the smuggling gangs and illegal working. So there's two questions. First off, can the Home Secretary confirm to my constituents that the Metropole Hotel in my constituency will close as an asylum hotel by this government before the next election? And can she confirm when she expects the border security bill to become law, and would it help if the party opposite and Reform actually supported this bill so we can get the job done?
Secretary.
Well, I can tell him we are committed to ending asylum hotels as over the course of this Parliament. We also will continue to roll out this pilot programme so that we can develop it in order to be able to tackle both returns and dangerous boat crossings. And as for the Borders and Immigration Bill, it is really important, has a whole series of really important measures in it. We would be able to get it through Parliament much, much faster if the Conservatives decided to support it.
Julia Lopez.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I fear it's another week, another fig leaf from this government on small boat crossings, which are up 40% under Labour. Now, I hope this French deal works, but as my right honourable friend for North West Hampshire says, the numbers of returns need to be very, very substantial, not just a modest pilot, but we also now wait to hear from the EU about whether it's going to actually approve this very modest UK-French migration deal. We know from experience that the EU tends not to give such approval without extracting a heavy price. So can the Home Secretary guarantee that the UK will not be signing up to any element of the EU Pact on Migration and Asylum when it launches next year, which could see us accepting much larger asylum transfers from the continent?
Home Secretary.
Well, what I can say to the honourable member is that we have been working with the EU Commission. We have shared, and so too has France, we have shared details on these proposals over many months as we have been developing them. The EU Commission has been very supportive, and indeed that's why in the UK-EU reset it does explicitly say that the EU Commission, the EU, will support action to tackle the dangerous boat crossings in the Channel and to prevent that illegal migration as well, because this is something that we have worked on for some considerable time. So we will continue to develop those partnerships with France and to make sure that we work closely with other countries, because we share the same challenges with these criminal gangs operating right across Europe, and that's why we need to act together.
Chris Vince.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Home Secretary for her statement? It was a real pleasure to hear President Macron's address last week with members from across this House and indeed the other place as well. Does the Home Secretary agree with me that it doesn't take Jules Maigret to realise that to tackle this issue both effectively and humanely, and I think back to that terrible image of that boy dead on that beach, and we shouldn't forget the human cost of these small boat crossings, we must work with our French allies?
Home Secretary.
My honourable friend is right, and One of the stories that still haunts me is of a little girl who was crushed to death in one of the small boats because of the scale of overcrowding and the way in which these boats, frankly, are dangerous. So as well as the risk of drowning, we have seen people crushed as a result of the overcrowding. And that is why we have to do everything we can to prevent these dangerous crossings, but also make sure that really across the world there are systems of sanctuary for those who have fled persecution. The criminal gangs exploit people's desperation and they should not be allowed to do so.
Carla Denyer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can the Secretary of State explain to us what happens if one in, one out works? Because if the goal is to stop small boat crossings and it's successful, then the outside of the equation drops to zero, which means the inside of the equation also needs to drop to zero, and that means the UK will have just got rid of the small sliver of a safe and regulated route scheme that it had just created. Doesn't the Secretary of State think that if we did that, that would be more likely to push people back to small boats and people smugglers?
Secretary.
I'm not fully sure about the logic of her argument. She seems to be arguing that if the scheme works, then it won't work. I think that is what she seems to be arguing. Look, I think we should be doing everything to prevent these dangerous boat crossings. We will continue, as we have done through the Ukraine scheme, through the support for Hong Kong, to ensure that the UK does its bit to help those fleeing persecution. And indeed, for example, we made reference in the Immigration White Paper to refugee study opportunities for people to be able to come study at our universities as well. But I would just say to her, I just think these dangerous boat crossings, this is so damaging. It really does undermine our border security. It really does undermine the credibility of the whole system. So we do have to make sure we take action to prevent those boat crossings.
Can I thank the Home Secretary for her statement this afternoon? I'll allow a few moments for the front benches to swap over.